although we had some good games in 2024, it's a pretty damn good year. We had some straight from the taint stinkers released in 2024. This year is the definition of nobody fucking asked for half of these games. Nobody wanted them. I would have bet my life's earnings that half of the games on this list would have been terrible before they even released. But before we get into it, thank you guys so much for almost 900 subscribers. I cannot believe we're actually almost there. If you guys are new to the channel, you like gaming news, gaming reviews, and this list content, please subscribe and like the video if you like the video. Now let's get into the worst games of 2024. And starting off, the first game we have is Multiversus. And this is a game I was genuinely looking forward to a lot. I was very excited for this game because I played it in the beta. And I thought in my head, if they could just fix the netcode and release this game almost the way it is now, just with the netcode and some additional content, some additional characters, this game would actually be very good and be able to not beat, but at least rival and be an alternative to something like Super Smash Bros. But my God, was I wrong, because this game got worse than the beta in almost every single possible way. And this is reflected by the player base, with under 500 players right now on Steam, when the game in beta originally peaked at over 100,000 concurrent players. They lost 99.5% of their player base. But where do I even get started here? Because they literally removed so many different things that the beta actually had. It got worse and content was removed from the beta to the actual release of the game. And this isn't just one or two small things. This is a ton of content removed that was integral to the experience that people had in the beta. And just a couple examples of completely just missing content that would make the game 10 times better. There's no damage done or ring outs after battle. You can't see who accepted or declined a rematch. There's no leaderboards. There's no offline play, free-for-all mode, no co-op versus AI, none of that. On top of this, if you go into the training, you cannot do any training or try out any characters that you don't already own. This was something in the beta that you had where you could say, oh, I really want to play this character. I like this character in training. Let me save up for this character that I can actually play in the training mode. You can't do that anymore now in the full release of Multiversus. You have to just guess or just get destroyed by a character and then say, oh, let me spend all the money that I actually have to buy this specific character. And on top of this, when the game initially released, it might have gotten better since then, you could spend 40 hours unlocking a single character. And this is coupled because you never got this currency to actually get characters unless you did specific missions or leveled up your specific battle pass, which you only got XP for when you did missions. And some of these missions were terrible. You could have missions where you had to actually get eliminations with characters that you don't even own, or with types of characters at least that you don't even own. So you were completely locked out unless you spent money to buy that type of character, to complete the mission, to get your battle pass up, to actually get currency to buy new characters. It was insane. Now granted, there was a free rotation of characters, so I guess you could play one that you really didn't actually enjoy to then get the mission done, but overall, it was just a very bad system, and it felt very predatory on any of the consumers' wallets. And there's so much more here. I'm sure the Multiversus faithful could go into this for hours, but that's not to say they didn't add any new content. The issue is the new content that they did add was stale, tacked on, and overall just boring gameplay. The biggest being the PvE mode that they added called Rifts. And this was a PvE mode that revolved around different tutorials, challenges, story-based missions, etc. And although I was happy they were adding a PvE mode, and it's something in concept that sounds cool. You go to these different rifts, you fight all of these different characters within the Multiversus universe, and you have different difficulties with all of these different bonuses you can add to your character to make you stronger against certain types of enemies that you're fighting, etc. All of that sounds cool, but in execution, it was so boring. You go through these and slog through them over and over and over for little to no reward in a mode that just felt very tacked on, very boring, separate from the actual PvP mode of the game, and it just, again, it just wasn't very fun because the challenges in here were not good. Some challenges you hopped in a little tank and you had to shoot little targets going into the air. Some of these challenges you fought against other characters and had to make sure you beat them in certain ways, but overall it just wasn't very interesting. It wasn't very fun. It was very time consuming for, again, very little reward, especially the specific skins that you had to get for beating all of these. You would have had to play a ridiculous amount of hours of this PvE mode, slogging through these different rifts, finally to get the skin that you're actually working towards. And it wasn't like you could just sit there and grind a couple difficulties of these rifts, finish them, and then get the skin. You couldn't do this because a lot of the upcoming rifts were time gated. They were sitting there, but you couldn't actually play them. So you had to keep doing the same ones over and over and over, unlocking the harder difficulties. Some of these harder difficulties, at least for me, from what I remember, I couldn't get until I completed more rifts, which means I had to wait till the time gate came out, beat the one that was time gated, and then unlock the other harder difficulties to the ones that I already completed, go back and complete those, get more rewards to finally unlock the skin. It wasn't worth it. It was so many hours. They're time gating you from playing the game that you want to play, and it just was a way to get you to hop back into the game for more and more and more weeks, more days at a time, and it was just such a bad system. And last but not least, some of the most important shit here is having a smooth multiplayer experience, which was the main reason that they took the game offline, tried to fix the netcode, and then re-release the game in a whole different engine. The problem is, there were still crashes. There were still bugs. There was still lag. There still is, from what I read, to this day. And it just never really got fixed the way that it needed to get fixed. Although I do feel like the netcode overall felt a lot better for the most part from what I played. And what the hell happened to the character portraits? What happened to them? Now for number 6, we have Star Wars Outlaws, which to a lot of people might be a little bit controversial because Star Wars fans, Ubisoft fans, there are some people aside from those that did actually enjoy this game, but this was a game that I could not get into for various different reasons. And this is one that also really pissed me off as a Star Wars fan because Ubisoft could have had a slam dunk here. This is a game that takes place between episode 5 and 6 in a really awesome period of time within the Star Wars universe that so many people know and love, where we could finally explore the more underworld type of side of the Star Wars universe in gaming, which I thought was so damn cool as this low-time outlaw. But unfortunately, the story never really gripped me in this game. It felt very hollow and very mediocre to the point where I was just bored going through the game and didn't necessarily care what to see next. And coupling this with so many different bugs, with the stealth mechanic and the forced stealth missions being terrible because of how bad the stealth mechanic actually was, where you could literally just hide in grass, pop out, shoot 5 dudes, they all charge at you, you just crouch back down in the grass, and they just all of a sudden have no idea where you are. It made no sense, it wasn't realistic, and it took me out of the immersion in the game. And although no, this wasn't the worst game that I played this year, it wasn't even Ubisoft's worst game by a long shot, it was one that was very disappointing to me. I was expecting to come in here, have this story with blurred lines between good and bad, where you as the outlaw are just doing some scummy shit to get by in this universe as a whole, but it didn't end up necessarily being like that, and it was just one that was very disappointing to me. Although, I will say, this game did have amazing atmosphere. Obviously, music in Star Wars is always incredible. They did some good things here on top of the things that I didn't like, so I do want to give it credit for that. If you're someone who just wants to hop in and be in the universe of Star Wars, I think it did a very good job portraying that in a lot of different ways. Now, moving on to number 5 of my worst games list, we have a game that is probably on everybody's worst games of 2025 list, a game that died in legitimately 2 weeks, a game that nobody wanted and everybody knew was going to die before it even released. We have Concord, the biggest blunder of 2024. The reason I don't actually have this game a little bit higher up on my list or in this number 1 spot is because As a game, it actually did things and played relatively well. The gunplay was good, the movement felt crisp. All in all, the actual gameplay specifically itself didn't necessarily feel bad at all. On top of this, there were some interesting abilities from characters like the big vacuum guy that I don't think we've really seen in a lot of other games of this type. But how did this game fail? Why is it on my worst list if the moment-by-moment gameplay was actually relatively okay? Because this game lacked all identity. It felt like a game copy and pasted from multiple different properties into one, and a game that nobody wanted to play before release, coupled with terrible decisions by Sony, both in terms of releasing this game for hundreds and hundreds and hundreds of millions of wasted dollars, and their monetization practices in general competing with other games within the same genre. The character designs were so blatantly pulled directly from Guardians of the Galaxy to try to get that same vibe. On top of that, the way these characters interacted in these story cinematics that we're gonna continuously release over time to keep players interested was literally, again, a direct ripoff of the same type of vibe that you had in Guardians of the Galaxy. This game was also a hero shooter released for $40, and although it did have a little bit different gameplay, it was more Call of Duty-like than some of the other hero shooters out there right now. You have games like Overwatch, games like Apex Legends, games like Valorant that are all hero shooters in their own ways that you would have to pull them away from those free-to-play games that people have already put time and money into to then go play Concord, which also had microtransactions on top of the $40. And when you don't have characters that are interesting, and you don't have a story, those cinematics that are really going to pull people in and grip them into the universe because it felt like something we've seen a million times before, something we sat down in theaters and legitimately watched a better version of from Marvel, no one's going to move over to that game, especially when you have other games that are already within the same genre that have their own identity and gameplay style that's different from the other games out there that don't have a $40 barrier of entry. Overall, this was a game that from the first trailer, nobody was interested in. And of course, there was a lot of people that hopped on the hate train and shit on this game and never even tried it, but that's not their fault. That's the fault of the studio and Sony themselves not getting us interested in the game in the first place. Now for my next game here, and I was kind of struggling whether to actually know if I should put this onto the list or not, because I don't necessarily always think that DLCs should be on the best or worst games lists. However, I made an exception for this one specifically because Starfield had a relatively good foundation. It wasn't a great game, it wasn't a terrible game, it was kind of somewhere in the middle, and I thought the DLC would take a lot of what players wanted and make it even better. But when you have a foundation and make the DLC more disappointing than even the original game actually was, I'm sorry, you deserve to be on the list. Number 4, Shattered Space DLC, Starfield. Bethesda has always been a studio that delivers banger DLCs that make the original game even better than it originally was. If you look at Fallout 4 with Far Harbor and Nuka World, if you look at Skyrim with Dawnguard and Hearthfire, even if you go back and look at Oblivion, they have always improved on the base game and made really good DLCs. Starfield had absolutely no new companions, had hardly any new really cool unique weapons. There was no new ships, no new ship parts, reusing the same ones that you had in the base game. And for the things that they did add, like a new planet that was supposed to be very handcrafted, a similar experience to what fans really enjoy from Bethesda in the past, it was bland, it was stale, the POIs weren't interesting that they actually did handcraft and still felt like the simulated POIs from the rest of the Starfield game. Vareha, my favorite companion, going back to her homeworld in this entire expansion, not having hardly any voice lines or dialogue to get you more immersed, even having bugs at the end of the entire storyline that was supposed to actually flesh out what she felt going back to her homeworld that was completely bugged out to where she didn't say anything. A story that was relatively mediocre as a whole, where you just went back to the same people in the same city every single time completing quests. kind of feeling like an MMO fetch quest simulator. It just feels like Bethesda completely forgot what they actually do well. And when they tried to do it well again, they completely failed. And the reason why I'm so down on this DLC and this game as a whole is because Elder Scrolls 6 is the next one to come. And I am so damn worried for what they actually have in the chamber for that game. The only thing I really thought they did well here in this DLC was the environments and the atmosphere. I thought it looked beautiful. It was really cool walking through the world and exploring this new planet for the first time. However, when you were exploring, there was nothing rewarding when you actually got to your destination. And now for the top 3 stinkers here. Number 3, oh god, I don't even want to say its name. We have Suicide Squad, Kill the Justice League. This game was so damn sad because Rocksteady consistently made some of the best single-player games on the market with the Batman games. These games were incredible start to finish, but they were forced in a direction where they had to release a live service Suicide Squad game that could have been so good if they just stuck to what they did best and made a single player version of this game with characters that people know and love from the universe that they've worked in consistently for years and years and years, making incredible games in. But instead, they were forced to make this live service Suicide Squad game that was genuinely one of the worst experiences in gaming that I have had this year. I don't even know where to start here, so I'm just gonna go rambling off about shit I did not like about this game. With the characters specifically, whether you're playing as Deadshot, King Shark, Harley Quinn, you always had to be using a gun because they wanted this to feel like a looter-shooter live service video game when it just doesn't make sense within the world. It would be cool if they changed up the way the gameplay worked for these characters, so King Shark, for example, might have been a character that uses pretty much only melee. He could get in there while there's other characters with guns and try to balance the game around that. The way all of the characters acted in the game, it's like they had to portray them as the good guys. And this ruined the dynamic between the Suicide Squad members and the dynamic of the story in general because you really just felt like they were the good guys. These are not good people. These are the villains. And you're fighting against Brainiac and the superheroes that he controls, but that is such an obvious way to do the story. I would have loved it so much more if they actually had you play as the bad guys fighting against the good guys, not the bad guys who legitimately just were good guys in this universe fighting against the good guys that were actually just mind controlled by the overall bad guy. It was just such a blatantly obvious way to do the story that wasn't interesting in my opinion at all. None of the boss fights were interesting. They all felt like reskins of another one, and all the new ones they added legitimately were reskins of the other boss fights. You're playing the same type of missions over and over and over and over and over again. The end game in this game is literally non-existent. You're just playing the same shit over again. The new content they released was the same shit all over again with a different skin on it. The city in general that you quote-unquote are playing within or exploring has absolutely no life in it. The new characters they added, like Mrs. Freeze, for example? Who the hell wanted Mrs. Freeze? She doesn't even exist. And getting these characters was the same slog of the same missions over and over again. Oh my god. Oh, on top of this, the skins they released for all the characters were dog shit. And obviously, in all live service games, for the most part, you're going to be doing the same thing over and over again. But when there's stale progression, when the gameplay is stale, it just makes the whole experience of what you're doing stale, and there's no really variation of any of this, or at least interesting variation. The fact that this is where Rocksteady ended after all of these years of great games with a live service game that has stopped service already within a year of its release is so damn sad. But somehow this isn't even the worst game of the year. We have 2 games that are even worse than this that just I personally played. And number 2 on our list of worst games of 2024 is the first quadruple game of all time, brought to you by Ubisoft, Skull and Bones. And what makes me so mad about this game, and that just pisses me off, is I love pirates. Okay, I am a huge fan of any media or form of media that has pirates or a universe with pirates in it. My name is Straw Hat Mikey 23, literally from One Piece, my favorite anime, all about pirates. Exploring the open seas with the crewmates. Everybody has their own part. You're all drinking, having a good time on the boat, going on a big grand adventure to find all of this treasure or to explore all of these new islands that might be undiscovered or have a people on there that are completely new to you. All of this stuff is so damn cool, and that's what you get in the pirate universe. Going and ransacking other boats, jumping on their boat, taking their loot, bringing it back to your boat. This is the coolest shit about the pirate universe to me, and this game almost made me hate all of that, because none of that is in this game. Even though this game was modeled off of Assassin's Creed Black Flag, where you could do a lot of that stuff in Assassin's Creed Black Flag, they tried to make all the best parts of that game into its own standalone experience, and they completely failed. They had the exact blueprint they needed to follow to make this game fun, and they failed in almost every possible way. The game is just so damn boring. The whole point is to go around, you're just collecting different materials, you're going to these different islands, but you can't even dock off your boat. You can't actually walk around any of these other islands that you're exploring or go in and fight anybody on foot. Your whole gameplay is just in your boat. You're just sailing around constantly, going around slow as shit for 10, 15, 20, 30 minutes at a time, never leaving your boat. Anytime you're collecting something, you just sit there. Collected, next, sit there. Collected, next, sit there. Collected, next, you go to an island, trade. Let's trade. Next, you're never getting off your boat. You're never doing anything off of your boat. If you find a different boat out in the world, yes, you can fight it, but guess what? You can't go and actually steal their loot. The way you steal their loot is to kill the boat and sit there. That's all you do, the whole game. You boat around and you sit there and wait. You boat around, you sit there and you wait. That's it. That's all you do the entire game. Yes, you can actually go on your home base and actually get out of your boat and walk around there, but that's it. There's nothing else you can do, and it feels buggy and laggy. It feels terrible. And the whole point is to upgrade your boat and crew and buy new boats, but it has the same problem as every live service game does, where you have to continuously log on and play hours and hours and hours of this boring ass slop over and over again to actually unlock anything substantial. And granted, I never made it to the end game, so maybe the fights are different at the end game, because all the fights that I went through are the exact same. None of them feel or felt any different from what I played previous. On top of that, there also is PvP, sorry. I didn't do the PvP, but from what I really heard, it was just a supply run, and all the people are trying to get the person that's doing the supply run. And in general, if you just use the fastest ship, you get the supplies, nobody can catch you. Maybe they fixed it, but that just seems terrible, seems awful. But if a game is not good from the start up until the end game, why would anybody actually get through that and play the end game unless they are a fan of just torturing themselves through a bad video game? It doesn't make sense to me. This was the first quadruple A game of all time. Ubisoft continuously, over the last decade, has only released mediocre or terrible games. The only game that they made that was good was Prince of Persia: The Lost Crown, and they disbanded that studio. So they just keep getting worse. This was the pinnacle of how bad Ubisoft has gotten lately, and hopefully they can finally turn this around at least a little bit for Assassin's Creed Shadows, but I'm not holding out any hope. And now for the worst game of the entire year, somehow worse than all of the other games that I already mentioned on this list, we have Dustborn, a game that I only played because of how bad I heard and saw that it was, and I had to genuinely just see for myself how absolutely dog shit this game was. And in that respect, it did not disappoint. This game was terrible. Now, at the surface, this game is about you, the main character, and your group of friends in this traveling band in an alternate reality of the United States known as the America Republic a couple years into the future. I believe it's 2030. But what this game is actually about is why discrimination is bad, why your words can actually hurt people and why bullying is bad, and all of this is really what the game is actually about. But the problem was this game was almost a parody on what it actually tried to do, or the message it actually tried to convey. Your quote-unquote powers as the main character are dialogue options like triggering people or canceling them, to where it just kind of makes your main character feel like the exact type of person that this game is criticizing in the first place. There's a whole scene which a lot of people talk about where there's these two cops and you manipulate them into shooting each other. What? And I'm not against games being inherently political. I think Metaphor ReFantazio, one of my favorite games of the entire year, was very political in a very good and nuanced way that made the whole story extremely interesting. But this game was not nuanced in any way, was so ham-fisted down, and again, felt like a parody of the same message it was trying to convey. Now, if the gameplay aside from this was at all fun or enjoyable, maybe this would be a better experience for some people. However, the gameplay revolves around these narrative choices that I was just mentioning. Aside from this, you have some puzzles, some very small combat encounters here and there, and then you have this quick time event of your band playing the most mind-bogglingly bad songs to listen to that I've ever heard in a game. The characters are not at all interesting or unique or relatable in pretty much any way. The voice acting in the narrative is so bland and stale, and it is not delivered realistically. And the cartoonish art style that they tried to go with is so hard to look at. Everything that they do in this game, anything they tried to execute on, they did poorly. And that's the best thing that I can say about it. When you can't convey a message that you're trying to actually convey in your game, when the story is bad, when the characters are bad, when the dialogue and the narrative is bad, when the art style and the atmospheres are bad, when the music is bad, when the gameplay itself and the gameplay loop is bad, you end up with a game like Dustborn. But finally, we are done talking about the worst games of 2024. My only honorable mention here is one I just didn't even get a second of time to actually play, and that was South Park Snow Day. It kind of flew under my radar with a lot of other big games this year that I wanted to make sure I played. I heard it was terrible. I watched some reviews on it, but again, I didn't touch it myself, so go check that out if that's something that you're interested in seeing what that reception was upon its release. My next video that's going to come out tomorrow is the best games of 2024. I'm much more excited to talk about and post that video than this one, just having to relive the terrible moments of gaming in 2024. Granted, not all these games were terrible, like Dustborn and Skull and Bones, but all of them, I think, were able to make this list for a lot of different reasons. But granted, these are my personal worst games of 2024. You might like some of these games, and that is completely okay. I would love to hear down in the comments, do you like some of these games that are on this list? Do you not feel like they should be on here? Are there games that I'm missing that I might not have played this year that I didn't put on this list that are as bad, if not worse, than some of these games? I would love to hear down below. Like this video if you like this video, subscribe for more, and I'll see you guys tomorrow in my best games of 2024. Peace!